When I was flying C-130s in the combat zones, my life depended on a 17, 18, 19-year-old fresh out of high school loadmaster, someone who I had potentially only just met that morning when we showed up to fly combat missions. It wasn't my rank, it wasn't my training, and it wasn't the chain of command that dictated what kind of trust we would have. My life and the life of my crew depended heavily on whether or not that loadmaster trusted me enough to tell me the truth when something was going horribly wrong. You see, most leaders, they think that trust is just a nice to have soft skill. They think it's a soft skill, something that HR talks about. But you see, in the military, what we learned was something significantly different. Trust isn't a soft skill. Trust isn't the soft stuff that's surrounded around leadership. Trust is, in our environment, the chain of command. Today, I'm going to show you why the same principle that keeps aircraft flying and military aviation and high stakes environments is the one thing that's killing the performance in your organization. How's it going? My name is Jason Harris. I'm a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and I spent over 27 plus years as an Air Force officer and a pilot flying everything from training missions to combat operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places around the world. I've served as a squadron commander. I have taught leadership, character, and culture at the United States Air Force Academy, and I continue to share lessons that I've learned throughout the course of my career, from the office to the cockpit to companies like Caterpillar, Lockheed Martin, and Ford. What I've seen over the course of my career is this: the organizations that win, they aren't the ones with the best strategy. The organizations that win, they're the ones where people actually trust each other. And most leaders, they have no idea how you can build that level of trust. Today in this video, I'm going to break down the 5 things that I learned about trust from my career in military aviation as well as in commercial aviation that apply directly to your team. We're going to talk about why trust is measured in seconds, not in surveys, why rank doesn't fly the airplane and doesn't lead people, and how training builds trust before you ever need it. We'll also talk about why process create predictability, and the hardest one for most leaders today that I find is that actually letting go and trusting your people to execute the mission is the most challenging. So let's spend some time and let's get into it. Point number 1, trust is measured in seconds, not in surveys. You see, in aviation, there is no time for us to second guess when someone calls something out. In aviation, we are traveling at such a fast pace. Imagine traveling between 5 and 10 miles per minute. When you're traveling that fast, you don't have time to second guess what's happening. You don't have time to second guess what's coming next. And you don't have time to second guess when someone tells you to brake left, to brake right, or to go around. You have to have the ability to trust that person, because it's seconds, not minutes, seconds that will determine the difference in life or death in these environments. And the same goes for business. You have to have the capability and the capacity and make those decisions in seconds and not second guess when you're told certain things by certain people on your team. See, in organizations, what I've learned through working with various organizations across corporate America as well as in aviation is that decisions happen fast and trust has to be instant. In flying airplanes, when we're feet away from touching the runway, feet away from landing, making the perfect landing, and that young person, that loadmaster, when they say go around, trust has to be instant. We have to make a decisive decision, do a decisive act in that moment, and it has to be instant. We don't get time to think about whether or not we want to respond or react. We have to be decisive in that moment, and that is based on trust, and that happens in an instant. And you have to have the ability in the business world, in the business environment, leading and running teams, to also be able to make decisions fast and decisively based on trust. Now, when you're looking at, well, how does this apply in your organizations? What I want you to think about is that oftentimes we're in organizations and we're having meetings about meetings. And then we're having meetings about the meetings about planning the next meeting. There's all kinds of hesitation. There's all kinds of time. And we're actually wasting a lot of time with all of this thinking and hesitation. And often what we find is the reason that there's this level of hesitation, the reason that we're taking this amount of time to make one single decision is because we don't have trust. And when you hesitate, your competition will win. They will destroy destroy you every single time when it comes down to making things happen, being decisive, and actually winning the contract and actually delivering when it comes to handling business. So there are significant costs when you have delays and you have hesitation in making decisions in the business environment. See, right now, I want you to consider whether your team actually trusts each other. Do they trust each other, and why or why not? And then what is that you could do to change that level of trust, to establish that level of trust with your team members, and then elevate that level of trust. You see, it's how fast they can trust each other when it matters. It's going to make a difference in your organization. It's going to make a difference in your business. See, we train for that in the military. We train for that level of trust. We train to be able to trust each other and operate as a cohesive team that allows us to go out there and execute the mission. So what can you do right now with your team to build that level of trust so that they have the trust when it actually matters? See, I recall a particular time where I was flying an aircraft with a crew of 3 other people. It was me, 1 additional pilot, and 2 crew members in the back of the aircraft. We were flying over Iraq and it was a dark night. And this particular night, we had another aircraft that was unidentified that was flying directly towards our position. We were doing a high-profile mission that we actually had to make sure that we succeeded at, but we also had to make certain that we did not allow this aircraft to crash into us and that we didn't crash into this aircraft. And as the aircraft got closer and closer, we realized that we were actually at the same altitude and that there was no altitude deconfliction, and a decision had to be made in that moment. And in that moment, I made a precise decision and my crew trusted me to make the decision. They didn't panic. They knew that I would make the right decision because of the trust that we had amongst each other. And they also understood a few other things that I had, which was my training, the processes, the checklist that I was running that I'll talk about here in a minute. But because they knew that, they trusted me to make a decisive decision in that moment that could have been fatal if not done correctly. In that moment where that aircraft was coming towards us, I had to max perform our aircraft so that I could barely miss this other aircraft while also maintaining our eyes and our sensors on the target that we were actually tasked to manage that evening. We were able to safely avoid that threat. We were able to safely not crash into this other aircraft. And they were able to trust me to make a decisive decision in that moment. They didn't even have to question whether I was capable of doing it because of the level of trust that we had within our team. So I want you to think about, if you were faced with something like that right now, would you have the ability to make a decisive determination and take decisive action? And then if you did make a decision, taking decisive action, would your team trust you or would they question what you're doing? All right, my second point, the rank doesn't fly the airplane. Here's the thing, your rank and your title, when you step into the airplane, it doesn't matter. I remember when I was a young lieutenant and I was learning how to fly the C-130, and I got to fly one day with a general officer who's a 1-star general, and here it is, I'm a lowly lieutenant, and this 1-star general hops in the airplane, and he's the aircraft commander or the pilot in charge, and I'm the co-pilot. But when he briefed, he said something that was really important. He says, look here, Lieutenant, I need you to understand that when we get into that airplane, it's no more lieutenant and general. It is now pilot and co-pilot. We're flying this airplane together. The rank doesn't matter. Us being safe and us flying the airplane safely and proficiently and smartly and wisely, that's what matters. And so he made certain that I understood that it wasn't about the rank. It was about us actually getting the mission done and being able to trust each other to do that. You see, the military, we have a clear-cut hierarchy of rank structure. There's how our ranks are structured and then who salutes who and who answers to who and who's over. All of that hierarchy is important in a certain period of time. But in the case, once we get into the airplane, that rank hierarchical structure, it doesn't necessarily go out the window, but we don't allow that rank hierarchical structure to get in the way of actually doing the mission, doing the job. That's why we actually get rid of the idea of the rank, and it's the position that you're sitting in so that I know who's talking. If it's the co-pilot, where's it coming from? If it's the aircraft commander, where's it coming from? If it's the flight engineer, the navigator, the load masters, I know who's talking and why. And it's not about their rank. It's about what their capabilities are and what they have been trained to do so that I understand from what perspective and what vantage point that feedback is coming from. Right now, what I want you to consider when it comes to how you fly the airplane is that in the cockpit, cockpit, it's all about who has the most precise pieces of information. It's not about the rank. It's not about who outranks who's older, who has more time in the airplane. It's about what piece of information do you have? Is it relevant? Is it valid? And is it going to make a difference in getting the mission done? And is it going to save our lives? That's what matters most. The best, most relevant, most valuable piece of information, especially when seconds is what counts. So it's not that rank, it's that information. If the co-pilot sees something wrong, we speak up. If the loadmaster sees something wrong, we speak up. We have this policy: if you see something, you say something. What that means is we don't play let's keep a secret. We make certain that we understand that information has to be passed up. And when you pass that information up, it has to be information that we can use right now to make a decision. Consider this: if we're landing the airplane and someone says go around, then we need to respond, and we immediately go around. We discontinue the landing and we immediately reposition the aircraft, and we get away from the runway and we figure out what was wrong. Because that's the piece of information that matters right now. That could be called by the co-pilot, that could be called by the loadmaster in the back of the airplane. But now consider if we're at 20,000 feet and the loadmaster says go around. At 20,000 feet, we don't have the gear down. We're not about to make a landing. So we don't respond and react to that. So it's about who's saying it, who's speaking up, who's saying something and who's saying something, and what is the information that they're passing and why. And then we determine how we handle that. You see, in most companies, what ends up happening is information that gets filtered, and as it gets filtered, it gets sanitized. And in the airplane, the way we prevent that is we allow everyone to have that voice, everyone to be able to respond to something. If you see something, you say something, and there's no filtering of the information. We immediately can respond to it. Again, back to that landing scenario. If you're getting ready to make the perfect landing and the loadmaster who's in the back of the airplane says, I see something that the pilot cannot see, so I got to pass it to the person who's senior to me, to then pass it to the co-pilot, to then pass it to the aircraft commander. But remember, we're only feet away from the ground. That means by the time the information gets to us, by the time it gets filtered, by the time it gets sanitized, by the time it moves all the way up to the front of the airplane into the cockpit, we've possibly impacted the ground, and we've possibly had a catastrophic situation happen. Well, this is what I see in organizations that I work with. You'll see that the information takes forever to get passed up. The information then gets stripped down and gets sanitized from the front lines because perhaps they don't trust that person on the front line, because perhaps they don't have the right training. And because that information is filtered, it's sanitized before it's passed up, then the true essence of that information doesn't ever actually make it to where it's supposed to be delivered to. And what does that do to the information? And oh, by the way, what kind of catastrophic challenges can that create within your organization if you are allowing that to happen and there's too much interference between information and where it actually needs to go? So it therefore renders some of that information useless to the leaders when they actually need to have the ability to act on it right away. So I want you to consider this. Does your team right now, do they trust you enough to tell you what you don't want to hear? And does your team trust you enough to tell you about the things that you are unaware of that you cannot see? Because your team is seeing things out there on the front lines that are your blind spots. And they're potentially seeing things that you just might not want to hear because it's going to require some work to fix it. But ultimately, does your team trust you enough right now to tell you what you don't want to hear and to tell you what you're not seeing? Third point I want to bring to your attention today is that training builds trust before you need it. You have to understand this idea of trust the training. When I talk about trust the training, it is about how do you have training that is trusted? How do you have a level of training that you know each person that's gone through this training will operate in the same manner because of the level of training and because of the foundations that you're creating with that training and because the training is actually validated. In aviation and in military training, we train relentlessly. We train over and over and over, kind of like professional athletes, so that we can make sure when the fit hits the shin in the middle of the night, there's no time for thinking. We're not moved by that pressure. We're actually able to execute and make things happen because of the level of training that we have, because it's validated training, and we train relentlessly over and over to make sure that we are ready to go when things get hot and when the pressure is on. You see, when people have that kind of training, they will know what to do, and they will also know who is trained to do what in that moment. You see, what I've observed in some organizations is when the fit hits the shin and things go crazy, everybody's doing this, everybody's looking around, they don't know who is supposed to do what. And there's an uncertainty as to who should be doing what job and what role because they haven't, one, trained for their own job and role, and two, they don't understand the training that their teammates are supposed to have. So it's not just training for yourself or for individuals, but it's also training that supports the team so that each of us knows what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and who can do it. That's absolutely essential when it comes to training. You see, most companies, what they'll do is they'll train for minimal skills, but they don't train to have a level of trust amongst each other and even trust for yourself, right? Imagine as a pilot having to make certain decisions. I not only have to trust the people around me, my team, but I have to be able to trust that I'm able to do what I need to do. In that moment I was telling you about over Iraq, if I didn't have the level of training, if I hadn't trained to that level of certainty, that level of confidence in myself, can you imagine how uncertain I would have been when that situation presented itself? So training, relentless training, it actually breeds a level of trust internally as well as externally amongst each other. And you cannot assume that this will happen naturally. You have to realize that we train for this purpose. Question for you when it comes to training. Is your training building competence and confidence in the training, in themselves, and in each other? If not, what can you do to change that and improve that? The fourth point I want to make today is that the process, it creates predictability. You see, what I talk about in the framework is trust the process. Trust the processes. Those processes like a standard operating procedure, like a checklist. You have to have the ability to trust the process because those processes, they actually create predictability. What do I mean by that? Every flight, when we go out there to fly an airplane, if you watch a pilot, every time we show up, we'll run the exact same flow and the exact same process and the exact same checklist to make sure that we get every single thing right precisely each and every time. It creates a level of predictability. With that predictability comes the ability to actually know exactly what I'm looking for. So when I look at that overhead panel, I know, okay, I'm going this way, this way, this way, this way. Then I'm gonna come down. I'm gonna it's so predictable. The other interesting thing that I've learned in watching other pilots is because of that level of predictability, because of the processes, if I see someone that doesn't do it quite like the predictable way that we have been trained, it allows me to step back and see if they really know what they're doing or if they're struggling. And if they are, then I can assess the situation to determine if I need to help them or not and what needs to happen. But that predictability helps me to know if I'm dealing with someone who's sharp and knows what they're doing, or if I might have a problem and a challenge with this person I'm going to be flying with. But remember, every single one of our flights, there is a checklist. The other thing to understand about our checklist is that it allows us to go through those flows that I was telling you about in the cockpit, put things in place, and then we run the checklist every single time to make sure that we did not miss anything. Every single time. That's the beauty of the checklist. And we do it the exact same way, saying the exact same things every single time. And so what I want you to consider is this, is that it's not because pilots we can't remember. No, it's because of how we operate and how we want to make sure that we're able to deliver when seconds count. We want to be able to deliver the same way every single time. And the other piece that I just was alluding to is that these checklists, what they create is they create a level of shared expectations, and they remove any type of ambiguity and uncertainty about who's doing what, who owns what, and can you get the job done and how you're going to get the job done. We don't have any ambiguity about when we have an emergency on the runway, who's going to do what, because we have a checklist for that, because we have a standard operating procedure to make sure we know who's going to handle what when the fit hits the shan. You see, in companies where there are unclear processes, this is where you see a lack of trust. This is where you see a lack of accountability. This is where you see finger pointing because no one knows who is supposed to do what. There's no distinctive level of accountability. When you have clear processes, you have clear accountability as to who does what, when, where, and why. That's the kind of accountability that our processes creates for us. And it gets rid of the finger pointing. It gets rid of the uncertainty and it gets rid of the doubt, and it sets the precedence and predictability for what's to come. So right now, do your people trust the process in your organization, or are they constantly working around it? I've seen organizations where there is a process, there is a checklist, but we have all kinds of workarounds all the time. So therefore, no one is adhering to the actual process because the actual process doesn't work and no one actually trusts the process that you have implemented. If that's the case, then you need to spend some time reevaluating what the process is, why is it not being trusted, and how can you make it better for your team. Fifth point that I want to make today is this: trust your people to execute the mission. This is one of the hardest things for leaders to do. You see, leaders, they will put in a lot of energy into training people. They have onboarding programs to make sure that they know how to do their job. They train them actually pretty well, and they build some great processes. They have great checklists in place. And then what we find is that leaders just can't let go. They can't allow someone to go out there and execute the mission by themselves because they haven't built up that level of trust to allow their people to go out there and do it without them being micromanaged. Can you imagine how that makes someone feel to know that I know what I'm doing, I know how to do the job, but someone feels that they always need to be with me, or that they can't fully release the reins to me to get the job done because they don't trust me? You have to know that you've provided your people with the right level of training, you provided them with the right processes, trusted training, trusted processes, and now it's time for you to actually trust them to go out there and execute the mission and not micromanaging them. In aviation, micromanaging people, it gets them killed because it's such a dynamic environment. You don't have time to be following and chasing someone with every decision, with every flight that they're making. And we know that when you're micromanaging those decisions in a dynamic environment, it can get people killed. And I think the same thing is with business. If you're micromanaging people, it's going to kill the business. It's going to kill the productivity, and it's going to cause people to want to leave, which is going to kill your organization and your teams. So stop micromanaging people and figure out what can you do to actually trust them. Once you've provided them with that level of training, those trusted processes, you have to step back and you have to be able to trust them to get out there and execute the mission. One of the ways that we do that in aviation is that we have evaluations. We have an annual evaluation, we have an initial evaluation, and we validate that you know the training, we validate that you know how to use the training, and we validate that you understand the processes, and we validate that you know how to use the processes and the checklist to execute the mission. And so what I would encourage you to do is that if you were struggling with this idea of micromanagement and letting it go, figure out how can I create the framework to validate that they understand the training, the framework to validate that they understand how to leverage the training, the processes that allows me to trust them to execute the mission so I no longer have to micromanage them. What I want you to think about is this: empowerment, it isn't a buzzword. Empowerment is so important and imperative for a team to be able to actually do the job and be able to do it in a high performance way. You see, your frontline, they're seeing things that you don't see. They're having insights that you don't have, and they know things that you don't know. And the question is this: are you actually trusting your people to execute the mission? Or are you just saying that you're trusting them when in all actuality, you aren't trusting them? If you're not truly trusting your people, then I encourage you to figure out what can you do to truly trust them to execute the mission and not actually micromanage them moving forward. So as a recap today, I want you to think about this. Trust, it's measured in seconds. It's not rank and title that actually flies a plane or leads a team. It's the trusted training that builds trust before you ever need it. Processes, they create predictability, and you need to trust your people to execute the mission based on solid training and solid processes that you actually validate at work. This isn't about theory. This is what keeps military aircraft and civilian aircraft up in the air and flying. And this is what will allow your organization to keep performing at the highest level and become a high-flying organization. If you want to go deeper on this, I've got a free guide called the 7 Skill Sets of No-Fail Trust that I would love to share with you. You see, this free 7 skill sets of no-fail trust, it breaks down the specific skills that you need to build this kind of culture that I'm talking about here today. The link is in the description, and if this hits home for you, I'd love for you to just subscribe so that you can follow us for more information. I'm putting out some amazing content every week for leaders just like you who are done with average and ready to build teams that actually perform at the highest levels. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Blue skies, fair winds, and all the best.